Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm McKenna Yarbrough. I'm the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast Regional Directors for Best Friends Animal Society. And today's town hall is 2020, The Times They Are Changin' Part 2. This is our second in a three-part series as we dive into navigating the landscape of change, especially as it pertains to leveraging our communities and removing barriers to support our life-saving work. Tonight, we'll be talking with three amazing network partners of private humane organizations who have worked through shifting organizational operations as they save more animals. And next week, which is really a great town hall that I'm very excited about, we will all come back, our panelists from this session and the ones from last week are all going to come together, and it's going to be an open discussion with the audience to answer any questions and talk about fears and moving into a place where maybe we can see some changes with organizations and we can save more animals' lives. So just a few things, just some housekeeping items. We want to let everyone know you're automatically muted for the presentation portion of the webinar so that you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. If you do have a question at any point, just go ahead and type it in the Q&A box off to the right, and those questions will come to only us. Only the people moderating the session can see the questions, and we will answer them either periodically through the session, but we definitely have time at the very end to answer any and all questions that we have. And if we have any extras, then we'll carry it over to next week's. So keep an eye on the chat box as well for links to resources and items that you might find helpful as we navigate through the webinar. And please note that this is recorded, so it will be available after the session on our website, on our network partners website. So let's go ahead and get started and introduce our panelists. First up is Heather Owen. She is an amazing executive director for One Tail at a Time. So welcome, Heather. We also have Jackie Roach from Taysia Blue Rescue. Welcome, Jackie. And then finally, we have Denise Deisler. She is Executive Director of the Jacksonville Humane Society. Hi, Denise. So we're going to go ahead and start with Heather. So put Heather on the hot seat. So, Heather. So first I want you to share with everybody how your organization got started, because I love the story.
Yeah, so we started in 2008 in Chicago. Probably like everywhere else in the country in 2008 in Chicago, we were having a really rough time. The city shelter was slammed, a lot of shelter deaths, stray animals, just you name it, we had it. So I had been volunteering with another group and then saw firsthand what was happening at the shelter. So with a couple of friends, we decided to start our own rescue group, and our goal was to take dogs off the euthanasia list and find them homes. So we all got together, we pitched in 20 bucks, we started from absolutely zero. And the first couple of years we saved like 50 dogs at a time or 100 dogs, and things just kept growing.
That's great. Okay, so when we spoke earlier this week, you shared kind of the first big change that happened for your organization. So talk about that first big change that you all underwent.
Yeah, so in terms of adoption, removing adoption barriers.
Yeah.
So, again, in 2008, things looked a lot different. We didn't have town halls and collaborations, and groups weren't really able to talk about best practices and sharing data sets. So we just did what everyone else did. We had the long application, the landlord checks, the reference checks, sometimes employment check, like we had every check there was. And we did that for a couple of years. And, my job was to go into animal control and do the intake. So I would go through the shelters and there would be 50 dogs I wanted to take, and I would call our adoption and foster staff. We had one staff person at the time, and I would call her and be like, hey, there's 50 dogs. How many can I take? And she'd be like, one. I'd be like, no, I want to save more. Like, what is the holdup? And she said to me, I'm in my car all the time. And if I'm not in my car driving around the city doing home checks and dropping off animals, I'm on the phone playing phone tag, doing landlord checks and reference checks. She said, I can't do it anymore. So I said, okay, well, what do you want to do? And she said, I don't want to do home checks anymore. So I was relieved because I didn't want to do home checks either. I felt, you know, there was a couple experiences where I went in and I just felt like it was an invasion of privacy. It wasn't giving me any information. I would rather be at home or, you know, doing something else. So we said, okay. And we stopped doing home checks then, and we haven't done them since. And it's been probably like 7 years.
Wow. Now, you used to do reference checks and you don't do those anymore either?
Yeah, and same thing. So in 2015, we opened up an adoption center. So we started getting a lot more foot traffic. So people would come in and they would fill out the application and we would start doing their checks. And we couldn't get a hold of someone, or the vet was closed or something like that. So we were sending people away. And we all kind of sat around a table and we're like, we don't want to send people away anymore. Like, these are great adopters. You know, we want these dogs to go home. So we stopped doing all of those checks sort of all at once. The reference checks were easy because no one ever gave a bad reference. Like, you're not going to put someone down that's not going to give you a good reference. So that one was easy. The landlord check was a little bit harder for the team to get behind because we have a lot of apartments, a lot of renters, and a lot of bully breeds. So when we first talked about removing those checks to get the animals home quicker, the team was nervous that we were going to send home a bunch of dogs and they were going to come back. So we decided just to do it as a trial. Like, let's not do it for 6 months and see what happens. And I think it's been probably 3 years or 2 years since we've done it. And I can only think of one dog that was returned because of a landlord issue. And it was a really easy dog, so they got adopted the next day.
So tell me how you manage change with your volunteers. How is going through those changes with them? How did you communicate it?
Yeah, and I think we are really lucky. We have really, really wonderful volunteers. But I think they're also really wonderful and open to change because we're super transparent. I think anytime we're going to do something, we talk to them about it. And we share, like, this is why we're going to do it. Here's some studies, here's some links. You know, there's always some sort of science or data behind what we're going to do now. So we always share that with them and they're able to voice their concerns. We'll talk to them about it. We have town halls within the organization. So it's really an open-ended communication, but also, like, we have our mission and values on our website, and like getting as many animals in and out as possible is part of our mission and values. So I think that people, they're behind it. So we've been lucky that change has been pretty easy because of those things.
Now, when we talked, you also talked a little bit about your foster to adopt situations where you used to make that a requirement. And do you all stop doing that as well?
Yeah.
You allow it, but you don't make it as a requirement.
Right. So if it's a dog that maybe needs to settle in for whatever reason or needs more behavior care, we'll ask to do it. But if it's not, it's an easy dog and people want to take a dog home and adopt them, we let them. And our return rate has gone down. I don't know how that happened, but we have like a really exceptional return rate now. And it just made it so much easier. We don't have to track those animals anymore, which means we can take more in. And as like a rescue, that's your main goal. You want to rescue as many animals as possible. So that has freed up a lot of time.
So one of the things when we talked, your stats, when you started with what you said, 50 animals, and now how many did you do last year? Like 1,000 or so? You did a lot.
Last year we did about 950 dogs and a couple cats. This year, though, we are on track to do over 2,000 animals. So we are on the train towards high volume.
That's great. And do you feel like there are any barriers still left to change that you're working through?
Yeah, and I think that's part of this whole process is, again, we started from every barrier you can think of and every hoop. And so for us, it stopped being like, let's just stop doing what we do all the time and sit down and look at why we do those things and ask ourselves, like, first of all, is this getting us where we want to go? Like, are home checks really giving us better homes, or are they just taking up our time? And then second, you know, even if this is getting us where we want to go, or if the intention is good, are we ruling out good adopters because we put these hoops in, or is this taking up our time that could be used elsewhere? So everything we do now is analyzed. There's still some things left. So we still do vet checks if they're bringing their animal into the shelter to meet another one. So we still do check their vaccines. And we still have like a pretty long application. So those are things that we're looking at now to see, like, can we drop these? Should we drop them? And I think having the conversation with everyone and hearing that other groups have dropped them and not had problems, or added that onto the conversation part of the application, has made it even better and easier to talk to people. We're looking at those now. So we are like constantly evolving. And I think that's one of the things I love about my group.
I agree. I think that's really great. I think it's good to show that you're still undergoing changes even now. So let me ask this. One of the other changes that you just actually mentioned is you started taking in cats.
Mm-hmm.
You started to expand to cats. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a dog lady. So we, when we started, we rescued what we wanted to rescue. We like dogs. We like big dogs. So it was always that was our goal. And then I found out that kittens were dying in our shelter, and I just thought that was like absurd. And that's at that same time, this was a conference maybe 3 years ago, and I heard Mark Peralta talk at the Best Friends Conference, and he said something that always resonated with me, that rescue isn't about who you want to save, it's about who needs to be saved. So in Chicago, bottle babies needed to be saved, and like, I didn't want to take in bottle babies, but that's who needed to be saved. So we started our kitten rescue team, and it's totally expanded. We have a cat lady on staff now. So I think we have like 100 cats in our care right now, which I never thought we would be there, but here we are. And I love it. It's very exciting to me.
That is cool. That's really good. Now talk about your shelter diversion program. I think that is a really cool program that you all set up, that you saw a need and you decided to fix it. So go talk about it.
Yeah, so we, it's called CRISP, the Chicagoland Rescue Intervention and Support Program. It's a coalition between, I think there's 8 of us now, different shelters and rescues, and with Chicago Animal Care and Control. And the purpose is twofold. First, if someone comes in to surrender their pet, our goal is to help them keep their pet if they want to and should, and it's a good fit. If it's not, then the second thing we do is we try to divert animals straight to rescue so they don't have to ever step foot into the shelter. And we did it because in 2015, we had a canine flu outbreak, and canine flu was really, really tough on our city, totally changed how we did rescue. It made it really, really hard. So we had this moment, we were like, what if we just got them before they ever came in the shelter and got sick with canine flu? Like, that would save us so much heartache and time and money. So we started doing that. But then there was also this, like, I think really big ideal shift in Chicago, where prior to that, and a lot of groups have been part of this with their community support programs, but when we first started, it was very much, we're rescuers. We are saving the dogs from the bad people, and we're going to put them in good homes, and we are heroes. And that shifted after we actually sat at the shelter and met the people that were surrendering their pets. There's only so many times you can see a crying family before you have to shift that mindset and perspective. So instead of being the heroes, we wanted to be the helpers. We wanted to help anyone that needed a hand caring for their family members. So that became like the most important piece of it, is keeping pets in homes that already love them. It's not rescue if they already have a home. And I don't want any more dogs or cats. Like, if they have a home, keep them. We don't need them.
I love that. So what is next for One Tail at a Time? Like, what's your next big project that you're thinking of, or next big change?
There's so many things. I mean, we want to keep going high volume, saving as many big dogs as we can in Chicago, but I want to bring that shelter diversion program to our transport partners. So, the groups that we take from in Texas or Alabama or Kentucky, I'd love for them to be able to provide their community with the same type of owner support that we're providing here in Chicago.
That's great. I love that. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to Jackie, and we'll come back to you with some more questions at the end. So Jackie, so you're running you're on mute.
Yep.
Tell us about your organization real quick.
Yeah, so first a quick correction. I no longer run the organization. I founded Taysia Blue Rescue along with my husband about 10 years ago. And I did lead the organization for 8 years, I guess, until I moved to Arkansas 2 years ago. And I needed to pass the leadership torch. So yeah, I'm still involved. And I'm on the board, but I think it's just worth calling out the strong volunteer leadership that we've built has really allowed the organization to sustain.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I entered into this like super naive about animal welfare. I didn't know anything about it. This was 10 years ago. We started out with the specific intention of being able to help Siberian Huskies in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, that was like just the super narrow focus. You know what they say about best laid plans. The first dog we actually helped was a Malamute from a shelter in Kansas, and our first volunteer was from Iowa. Our foster was from Iowa. So we kind of threw that out the window kind of right away. Now we cover all the states in the middle of the country: Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, Arkansas. And you know what, we were, you know, typical breed rescue. I mean, I think sometimes we are some of those that have some of the strictest policies, and we weren't any different when we started. You know, we just kind of got templates from other groups, and just kind of regurgitated some of that information until one day I met this applicant. He was a college student. He lived in an urban setting. He had a tiny little, like maybe 700 square foot apartment. He had no fence. He had no car. And I said yes to the adoption. And in fact, his apartment complex even had a weight limit, and I had to go to the landlord and advocate for the dog and advocate for Dan. And after the adoption, I would see Dan and Saffron out all the time, all over the city. They were running together. They were on his bike. He had a little carrier for her. They went everywhere together. And it occurred to me that he had built this amazing relationship with this dog, better than what I would ever do my own self. And so that was really kind of the start of questioning why we were doing what we were doing. And so we threw out, home ownership and fences immediately, but that was really easy because it was just me. And so I just made the decision and we did it. But since then, over time, we've gotten rid of the same thing as Heather, the reference checks, the home visits, fence requirements. I mean, all sorts of silly things that were keeping us from saving more lives. And we really started to focus on those life-saving outcomes.
So you feel strongly about your data. I mean, I know that we've talked a little bit about that. So talk about your data and how you kind of manage your change.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a nerd. If we don't know where the problem is, if you can't identify the problem, then how do you know where to deploy resources? And so that's how we think about the data. It's so game changing to know who's coming in, what's the source of the intake, and where are we going to spend those time and energy. And we knew that if we wanted to grow, we needed to understand and start tracking better information. And so this was a real game changer for us. Just like shelters need to know their intake and outcome details, rescues need to be tracking these data points as well. So when we started 10 years ago, there really wasn't a great web-based platform out there. In fact, we were using a platform. We had to use an old version of Internet Explorer. It didn't work if you had a Mac. I mean, there was all sorts of craziness. And we were just, we couldn't find what we wanted. So we built our own. We had a volunteer who literally donated thousands and thousands of hours, and he still continues to help us evolve. But that's really been a game changer. And all the volunteers have access. I take that back, not all. Most of the volunteers have access to the dashboard, but so they can see those year-over-year numbers of how many intake requests are coming in, how many of those are we able to help, how many adoption applications are coming in, how quickly are we getting to them. They're able to look at those numbers, and they're even able to identify trends, year over year, and see, oh, this is typically a slower time, and this year it's not, and it sparks conversation. So it's really kind of fun to watch how excited our volunteers are for that, for that information.
So I'm going to be honest with you. So I ran a shelter. I ran 3 shelters for a long time. So whenever we got a husky in, or a husky-like dog, you always know when it's in your shelter because they're so noisy and loud and talk and chatter
They're
with
all
everybody.
behind the door there.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they're the loudest animals. So we would always put our own requirements on people, right? Shelters. Okay, so we have to be more concerned about cats and kids, and they can't be outdoor only. And so how do you all get past all those stereotypical behaviors? Like,
So I got my first husky from a breeder because there was no way, and I wanted a husky. I mean, I was just like, that's what I want. I don't know why. And I would never have been approved by a husky rescue. And I don't even know that my shelter would have approved me for a husky at the time. I had a 3-foot fence. It was falling down. I traveled for work. I worked long hours. I had 2 cats. I was the poster child for, a denial. And yes, some are really athletic and they jump fences or they can climb fences, and some will dig and some have high energy. And yes, some have a prey drive and some don't. So all the things you could say about a husky, you could say about almost any dog. You just got to kind of treat them as individuals, just like we want to treat the applicants as individuals. There's nothing really magical about having a husky or putting a barrier other than maybe having a good vacuum.
Yeah, right? And earplugs at times.
Yeah.
So now you mentioned the volunteers, and you have a vast amount of volunteers. Tell us how you recruit and manage your volunteer corps. Like, how does that look for you?
Yeah, we wrangle hundreds of volunteers and we span 6 states. And I got to tell you, we still don't do it super great, but we're better than we were. And we were super fortunate. We went through the service enterprise certification through a grant from Best Friends several years ago. I think that we were one of the first organizations, the first cohort to go through that. And one of the things we really focused on in that was establishing an org chart, for this volunteer organization. And so it kind of helped everybody see their roles almost like you would, in any business or in any job. And it caused me to really look at myself in the mirror, and I had to stop trying to control everything and learn that through delegation and empowering others and trusting everyone to do their jobs, we could be more agile and have a better organization. That involves making everybody part of that decision making, explaining the why of the change, making sure they're advocates of the change and buying into the organization. We've also really invested in volunteers. If a volunteer wants to go to a conference, or if they want to attend a seminar or have any sort of, continuing education, we consider that an investment. We will help them financially do that. And in return, they agree to work on a project based on something that they learned to try to help make the process better and more efficient. So we've really tried to empower and share that burden throughout the organization. And it allowed the organization to sustain when I stepped down 2 years ago.
Great. Okay, so let me ask this last question for you, and then we'll go on to Denise. So are there any other barriers that you haven't talked about that you removed, or ones that you're still looking to change?
That's kind of tough. I'm really just like Heather. I mean, this was like a really organic transformation, and it's a lot of change to go from really strict barriers to now having this, organization where, you're starting with yes. But I still think our adoption process is really clunky, and it's not necessarily a barrier, but I think we're holding on to some processes that maybe are comfortable and work well. but since COVID, we're starting to struggle with providing good service to everyone who applies, because we've gone from, I mean, the applications have been pouring in. So I know we could adopt more if we could kind of get rid of some of the complexities that we have. And I think this might mean our own internal technology might need some enhancements and changes. It feels like a heavier lift.
Yeah.
And I think we have the opportunity for more growth. Maybe a broader geographical outreach. How do we start to target work in areas where we don't currently have a presence, but there's a need? And how can we kind of make that a turnkey process? And so those are the things that we're discussing and talking about right now. Not so much barriers, but we just want to be able to help more. That's kind of where we are. So.
Okay, well, great, thanks. All right, so Denise. So Denise hired me into this field about 20 years ago, actually, Denise, now. So
Yep.
Share with everybody all your many organizations you've worked for over the years.
Thanks, McKenna. Yeah, McKenna was my best hire ever. I had the good fortune to have a supportive family so I could move around and get different experiences in my career rather than being in one same or similar place. And so spent my formative years in the state of Virginia, first in Richmond and then in the Newport News Peninsula area, which anybody familiar with Virginia knows that's a tough town to do any work in. And then, of course, you and I did a lot of work around the state as well, going out and visiting other shelters and consulting and doing some good work courtesy of Petco. We began doing intervention work 20 years ago, thanks to Petco. Sometimes I marvel at that. Then from there, moved to Florida. And I used to think Virginia was backwards and had challenges until I moved to Florida. And then I realized what a progressive state Virginia really was, and have had the good fortune to work as the director in two different communities in Florida, and now doing work around the state from the home base of Jacksonville.
So what is a roadblock that you couldn't imagine still having today that we used to have back in the day?
There's so many that are important, but I think the one that was most life-changing and life-saving in my mind was getting rid of behavior evaluations or temperament evaluations or whatever it is you call it. And I think it's important for a lot of reasons, McKenna, and I was a user of, and from Richmond through the other 3 shelters that I'd worked at, it was a pretty commonplace thing for shelters to do, to conduct the behavior evaluation. Their original intent was to help identify what the dog's needs were, to make sure that you were able to address the dog's unique needs, but it very quickly slid to a different tool and used for different reasons. And I found myself really troubled by that. And at that time, I actually reached out to you and said, are you still doing behavior evaluations? Because this is driving me crazy. And you said, nope, threw them away and gave me a couple of good pieces of advice. And that was all I needed to hear. Sometimes you just need that sanity check from someone else. And it's so important because my gut was telling me, my head was telling me, what I was seeing every day was telling me this was wrong. Yet there was research and data out there to support behavior evaluations. So thanks to you, I had the courage to say, nope, we're not going to do it anymore either. And among the things you mentioned that we incorporated and embraced was you handle them more in the process of an intake evaluation. You get a much better feel for them in the normal handling that you have to do in a stressful environment. You learn a lot about the dog. And that was really enough for us. And so that was an instant change, and I couldn't imagine going back to it. I will say within a few years of that, the people who had created the most popular of those temperament and behavior evaluations walked back and said, you know what, we continued our research with this, and we don't think it's a valid tool anymore either. And I had enormous respect for the folks responsible for that they were open-minded enough and continued to research that which they had backed. They didn't just do it, implement it, and walk away. They continued to follow it to measure and monitor its value, and to have the courage and the integrity to come back to all of us in the field and say, we had the best information at the time and we thought this was a good thing, but now we know better and we're not recommending that. And that was so meaningful to me. Like I said, we had already stopped doing them, but to have them come back shortly on the heels of that and retract that particular practice that we had was very impressive to me. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to be willing to look in the mirror and not beat ourselves up for decisions we made, and be willing to say, yeah, with the best of intentions, I thought that was good, but it wasn't. And so we're going to stop.
All right. So this is, I know, a button for you. So when you hear people say, see, I know your secrets. When you hear people or adoption counselors say that they use their gut to make an adoption decision, talk about how you feel about that.
You're right. That's a button for me. And use it in training often. Your gut is the last thing you should trust when making decisions about people who are otherwise perfect strangers to you. We have to recognize our gut as all those things that our subconscious has absorbed over the years. And so we might make decisions with our gut that are really bad decisions without any level of awareness that that's what we're doing at all. It's so deeply ingrained in our gut. One of the safe examples I use, because I know he wouldn't watch, is I tell our trainees all the time, if a man walked in with cut off jean shorts and some travel t-shirt on with a slightly West Virginia drawl, my gut would say, deny him now, escort him out of our building. Well, that's because he looks and sounds like my ex-husband. I mean, that's what your gut does without even realizing it. It's processing things not in your frontal lobe, but that are buried back here. And so you can be making some pretty harsh judgments with that gut on people that have absolutely nothing to do with that individual at all. Your gut doesn't work for this occasion. It might be a good thing for some other things. Hi, Lily. I see Lily back there. And so your gut may work well for this, some other things, but it does not work for adoption screening, because you just have to recognize it's filled with junk that you're not even aware of that might be factoring into, I just have this feeling I can't put a finger on it. Well, there's a reason you can't. It's some bad thing that happened with you to somebody that looked like, sound like, reminded. I use the example, often think about music. You hear certain songs and you instantly have a feeling, don't you? It instantly takes you somewhere else.
Yes.
And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah. Same with your gut.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. So jazz to me makes me angry. Anyway, I know some people like jazz and I do not.
Me.
It's too crazy. All right. So my next question, what was a hard barrier or roadblock for you to get rid of? Like, what was something that was really hard for you to take that leap of faith and to try it and track it?
The toughest one for me, and it's a pretty recent one, was accepting return to field for cats, for otherwise friendly kitties. I had a really hard time with that. I'm a cat person and a dog person. And I just couldn't imagine why in the world would I take this healthy, friendly cat and put her back out to fend for herself when I've got somebody who will adopt her in a heartbeat. Why would I do that? And it was only after digging deeper, looking into some more of the research, and sometimes something just goes and you go, oh, dang, yeah. The research, I think Chameleon Cat Challenge gets credit for putting this out, said that cats are much more likely to find their way back home if you leave them out there than they ever are going to find their way back home in a shelter. The return to owner rate for cats in a shelter is horrendous. They might not even show up to the shelter until weeks after the person's come seeking them. And looking at that evidence and thinking about it, I remembered 2 cats, house cats, indoor only cats in my lifetime who accidentally snuck out, and the absolute terror and panic in me over them being missing and being outdoors. And after much searching and doing all the right things to find my cats, guess how they got back home? They came back home themselves. And so once reading that part of the data and going, well, wait, you actually lived this, you know this to be true. If my cat, either of those cats had ended up in the shelters in the communities I lived in at the time, the odds are not very good I would have ever seen my cat again. And so that really hit home with me that while I would thought I was doing something good for this cat, that was actually, even though I may have found him a new home, I was depriving him of the opportunity to be in the home he knew and loved. And I was depriving some family of the opportunity to get their cat back. But that one, it took me a while. I said, I had to read, I had to think, I had to ponder, I had to process. That one took me a long time to get my head wrapped around. Now I'm a firm believer. And the unexpected outcome of that is now we're able to bring cats and kittens in from other communities in Florida who have cat and kitten euthanasia rates in the 80 percentiles.
Yeah.
Cats and kittens who have no odds of getting out of there, or slim to no odds of getting out of there alive. So by not hanging on to that friendly cat who probably already has a place and already found his way back to it, I was able to help a cat who didn't have another outcome.
I love that. So you actually mentioned it. The next question is, you're helping communities across the state and also across the country, but you're focusing a lot of attention on going in and helping some communities rethink how they're doing things. Talk a little bit about your Polk County experience with some of the advocates there.
Yeah, Polk County is a very large county in Central Florida. It is the worst county in the state in terms of life saving and the number 6 worst in the nation for life saving. And so when we endeavored to do work in the state, it's obvious Polk, was at the top of our list. And at the time we first started looking and getting to know, who were the organizations in that county and in that community, what were the resources there. We were doing our homework before we went in to ask questions. And there was one woman very plugged into the community who connected me with a group of advocates who were very understandably fired up. They were angry, they were upset, they were unhappy with the lack of life-saving coming out of their county-supported facility. And they literally had their torches lit and pitchforks in their hand. They were ready to be very vocal and very confrontational about it. And so one of the first things I did was began talking with those advocates and finding a place that we could connect. Yeah, we're both unhappy about this, and nobody's delighted about this. But I'm going to ask you to work with me and trust me so that we can see if we can get those doors to that shelter open and approach them in a helpful way and get other organizations in the community and other advocates like yourself in the community. But my fear and concern is the county is already distrustful. They've already suffered a great deal of criticism. It was warranted, but that caused them to hunker down even further, close the doors even tighter, and be less open to doing anything different. So ask them if they would work with us and trust us and work with us to build trust with the county itself. So we help them form their own 501c3, get their name set up, and start doing some tabling and recruiting of other advocates and volunteers, but with very specific roles for them to play. We also had to do a lot of talk and a lot of work on playing nice in social media as well. And that once they set up their 501c3, they got a Facebook page set up and said, Ken, no good guys, no bad guys. This isn't where we criticize. This isn't where we perpetuate myths. Those are points of opportunity for education and engagement, not confrontation. And so as you might expect, as soon as that Facebook page went up, here came the myths and here comes the barriers and here comes everything. And people were very vocal about it. But it provided us the perfect opportunity to start sharing with them stories like the ones Jackie and Heather shared about their organizations, and sharing stories about other communities who let go of those barriers. Sharing real data about return rates on fee-waived adoptions that, again, they're not all clamoring to come back. And so we used that energy from those advocates and harnessed it, and they've become the best advocates in the community, armed with incredible information And those doors are beginning to open and lives are beginning to be saved. We've got a long road in front of us there, but we're going about it in a positive and constructive way. And the advocates, I'm so proud of them. I mean, their approach is absolutely on point, and it has been instrumental in helping us get the trust from the county leaders.
Awesome. And so you are okay with free adoptions and fee waived adoptions?
Oh,
And
100%.
all of that.
Just today, again, in Facebook world and some of the chat about it, for example, one of the people said, well, how can you possibly defend this despite the fact that myself and several other people had posted data-based studies and information? They still were firing back with the myths. And the one in particular that I loved, she's like, well, if they can't afford to pay an adoption fee, how can they afford pet care? And how can they afford this? And you've heard it all, right? And I said, listen, I go to Publix for the BOGOs because it's a good deal. Not because I can't afford to pay for the second 3 pounds of coffee. It's because it's a good deal. Why are you assuming that somebody comes in for fee waived, that they're broke and they can't care for an animal? That's a pretty giant leap. And that's just one of the excuses and things you hear about fee waived adoptions. The other being, oh, you know, they're going to do the kittens for snake food, and oh, the dogs are bait dogs. And I've been hearing these for 20 years. So if I sound tired, that's why.
No.
Because for 20 years, I feel like I'm having the same conversation, but it needs to continue happening. There are still people that hold on to that. And we need to keep that conversation going. And we need to be, you know, really open and honest about, you know, what works and what doesn't work. In Jacksonville, we were adopting, caring for, you know, between 3,000 and 4,000 animals each year. And just by removing those barriers and trusting our community and not looking at everybody as a bad guy, and trusting them instead, our adoption process is completely paperless. There is no form you fill out, let alone questionnaires and home visits. And it's very adopter centric. We want to know what you need to know. You're not in here for me to preach to you. People managed somehow, bless them all, for caring for dogs and cats long before any of us were around, didn't they? How the heck did they do that without us? Who knows, right? So it's going back to trusting them again. They did it fine before Denise came on scene. I'm assuming they can continue to do it after Denise is on scene. And so we want to know what they don't know. So we want to ask them, well, what do you need from us to help make you a good match? What are your expectations and what can we do to meet your expectations? You will learn way more information by asking those questions than you'll ever learn on a 5-page adoption form. The other thing I'll say about that, people aren't stupid. When they ask you, will your cat be indoors or outdoors? They know the right answer to that question. When you ask them, do you have a fenced in yard? They know the answer to that right question because they've been asking it for 20 years and turning them down. So they're pretty smart. They've got that figured out by now. So as I said, I think we just need to flip that switch and it needs to be adopter centric. They know what they know and they're going to ask us what they don't know because they want to succeed too. And so shut up and listen.
I like that. Okay, so I'm going to ask this for everybody, so everyone think about it. What was an aha moment for you in regards to removing a barrier or acknowledging your fears of getting rid of a barrier? And Jackie, I'll start with you.
Wow, okay, so, you know, I feel like everything comes back to an aggressive focus on life-saving outcomes, and you know, removing all those barriers helps us get to that. So this is for all the people that have gone to a seminar or conference and complained that the topic of the session didn't pertain to them. I'm going to call BS to that. Because this came when Nikki Harris was presenting on Jacksonville and their road to no kill. This was a number of years ago. And I went in there just because I wanted to see my friend Nikki Harris. And it had nothing to do with Husky Rescue. But here I was in this, you know, session on Jacksonville. And Nikki was talking about their community cap and how that was so transformative within that community. And she started talking about length of stay, and it wasn't even the crux of what she was talking about, but I got out my pencil and calculator and I started doing math, and I realized that, you know, we don't necessarily need to recruit more foster homes. We just need to be more efficient and reduce our length of stay. And then that's what led to some really big changes in removing barriers on our adoption process. So we were spending 8 volunteer hours playing phone tag with applicant reference calls. I mean, that's like absurd. And we dug further, and of course we couldn't find one example where we actually made a decision based on what we learned from a reference call. And it was a complete time suck and resulted in unnecessarily long length of stay. We were quickly able to increase, you know, life-saving because we started getting rid of all those barriers because of this one focus, and because I paid attention and took notes at a conference session on cats. So pay attention, there's always something to learn. That's my takeaway.
I love that. Okay, Heather, your turn.
Sure. I mean, I have so many. I'll share a couple of quick ones. I definitely had a moment a couple years ago when I was in the market for a new dog after my dog passed away. And I like a big fluffy dog, and there's not a lot of big fluffy dogs in Chicago. So I went elsewhere and was applying to foster and adopt and trying to get a dog. And I had the worst experience. I was denied as a foster. I was ignored. I was told that I wasn't a fit for a certain breed because of where I lived. And it was such a turnoff and such a moment where I was like, we're driving people so far away from us. We're loving these animals to death, really, is what we're doing. So I ended up getting my own big fluffy dog, and he has the best life ever. And I was like, just thinking how many people out there don't have that luxury of going and sourcing another animal and go to a breeder instead. So that was one of them. I think another one I shared with you, McKenna, when we talked the other day. We had a really bad experience recently, and these are very few and far between, but when you have a bad experience with a foster or an adopter, it can sour you really quick. And I think we tend to be like, how could we have prevented this? How, you know, what barrier could have been in place for us to prevent this? So I went backwards and I did a background check. And I called their landlord, and I Googled them. I found them on social media. I found their house. I did all of these things and nothing showed up. And I was like, I would have approved them anyway. So, you know, I think a lot of what we're trying to do doesn't even have the result that we're looking for. So why am I wasting my time and money doing it? So, and that was really nice to be able to share that with my staff too, to be like, you know, sometimes stuff just happens and that's okay. Like, we just have to work past it instead of piling on more barriers.
Okay, Denise, you're up.
A couple aha moments. One was realizing when we were discussing enrichment days, whether to let go of landlord checks or not. I was like, well, you know, if I count, I can probably count on one hand the number of illegal cats I had in an apartment because I didn't want to have to pay a cat deposit. And had somebody done a check on me, those cats would have missed out on having an amazing home.
Yeah.
I was just a cheapskate. I didn't want to pay the deposit. And if you're going to check with my landlord, I probably would have gone somewhere else and gotten a cat elsewhere. And so that's my second aha in all of this, was recognizing, and it sort of feeds on what both Jackie and Heather said, recognizing if they don't get a pet from me, they're going to get a pet. And I would much rather that we were populating our communities with animals that we know are healthy, are vaccinated, are behaviorally sound, are microchipped, and have a friend on the other end of the phone to call if they have a problem. That was the big moment for me, was they're going to get it. The president of my board got denied by rescue because she didn't have a fenced-in yard for a 2-pound little Shih Tzu dog, and she wanted to do the right thing and go to a rescue. Guess where she ended up? Breeder. She didn't not get a dog because the breed rescue turned her away. She went another route. This is the president of a fine humane society, but we backed her into a corner. She wanted to do the right thing. And so I think that's the big moment for me. And that if we can recognize that, and feeding on what Jackie says, that if we remove those barriers and we trust our community, animals move more quickly. When animals move more quickly, they're less likely to get sick, they're less likely to develop behavior problems, and they're going to be much tougher to adopt. So there's a dozen reasons for wanting to move animals through your system more quickly. And the last but not least amongst them, I said earlier, we did about 4,000 animals a year when I first came. Between all of those changes, we now do about 9,000. That change happened in less than 5 years, from 3-ish to 9,000. That's a lot of dogs and cats living and happy and healthy in homes because we were willing to let go of the way we used to do things.
Okay, so I do have one question here that I want to direct to Jackie, and it's from the audience. So the question is, down the road, how much would puppy mill shutdowns help decrease the need for breed-specific rescues? Are you worried about going out of business?
No, I would love to. But no, you know what, it's interesting though, because we do track data by state, and this is all anecdotal because I didn't look at the data before this. But I don't know that we get requests from disproportionate high puppy mill states. So Missouri is one of the states that we cover and has a tremendous amount of puppy mills, but our intake requests are not coming from Missouri necessarily. Now, there could be a number of reasons why, but that's just really kind of interesting. And now it's something I want to go back and do a map and try to figure it out. But I mean, yeah, I would, that would be awesome. I mean, not just, I mean, for all breed rescues. And I think, a lot of us would love to have fewer dogs. And
Okay, so this question, I've got 2 questions here. One, let's do this one first. So it's about breed-specific bans. Really, honestly, Jackie, this could come to you, but I would love Denise to also to answer it. So the question is, she's a humane society in the South, and if we, and when they do checks on animals going into rental units, because they have so many breed-specific bans. So how do they get away with not doing landlord checks? Denise, how about you? Let you jump on that.
I was gonna say, we don't have a breed specific ban in our community, although there are some places in the state.
Like rental units, like apartment communities that won't let certain breeds.
Oh, apartments breeds? Well, we don't identify by breed anymore, and that's one way we got around it. So every single dog at the Jacksonville Humane Society is a mixed breed dog, every single one of them. And we will provide letters for landlords and challenge them to do that and offer to do a DNA test for them. We put the onus of proof on them. You cannot determine what this dog is by looking at it. And so don't be your own worst enemy. Don't you slap the label on them. They're mixed breeds. And the truth, that's an honest answer. We don't know the breed of the dog unless it came to us with papers from a puppy mill somewhere. Otherwise, we don't know. And so the honest answer is it's mixed breed, and you can't identify a breed by look only. It's such a small percentage of their DNA makeup determines their look. But I will tell you another, without naming them, 2 other significant sized communities that do have a breed ban in place in their community. And the directors there made the criteria so high for identifying a dog in their care, identifying them as that breed that is banned, that most of the dogs don't meet that criteria. And so sometimes it's a perfect example of sometimes we shoot ourselves in the our own foot. Quit labeling dogs if you don't know what they are. Stop it.
Okay, so the next one, and I just want to piggyback on that. We're not the landlord police. People know if they can have pets or not. They know what requirements are. Most will want to do the right thing, and it's not our job to make sure that the pet can be in the home. Our job is to find a good home for the pet. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. So the next question, I have 2 questions on behavior evaluations. If you do not use a behavior evaluation, how do you record and explain to potential adopters what a specific dog's behavior and characteristics are? Do you all do behavior evaluations, Heather? No. So how do you all describe the dog's behavior if you're not actually evaluating it?
I mean, I don't think that not doing like a formal evaluation doesn't mean that you don't like record and look for trends. So we talk to most of our dogs are in foster homes. If they're not, then we talk to our volunteers and we just ask them like what you're seeing, and we'll record specific instances of behaviors. And if we see something that, you know, someone says they were aggressive or whatever, then we look into it more. You know, if someone says the dog nipped me or whatever, like we don't just slap an aggressive label on it. It's more of like experiences with the dog and building on that and just trying to get as much information and context as you can, and then sharing that with the adopter.
Yeah, so in the organization that Denise was talking about, we stopped doing behavior evaluations because we found them not to be reliable. When you make something so formalized, the dog wasn't really responding to us the way that they normally would in a home environment. So we started evaluating the minute they hit the door. You know, was it a friendly? Was it scared under the chair when you tried to coax it into the room? How did it respond on vaccinations? Is it easy to walk? So the minute it came into our facility is the minute that we started evaluating. And we just got away with the formalized. You got to pull them out, stick them in a room, ignore them for a few minutes, pet them, check their teeth, do the fake hand. And so we watched their behavior, how they interacted with staff, volunteers. You know, you can start to see some of the guarding behaviors in a shelter environment. So you just kind of keep an eye out for it and deal with it. And similarly, if we had a really difficult dog that was showing some signs of bad behavior, then we may pull them out and do a little bit more work with them. But again, we just stopped calling them behavior evaluations because so often they weren't accurate.
The other thing I'd caution on too is we're very careful to share with you what we observed and not to take that to the next step and interpret it. I think that's a mistake many in rescue and shelter make, as interpreting that. Well, no, I don't know why he's doing that. And to McKenna's point, so often some of that we observe in the shelter is gone the minute they go to a home. And it's some of that as a reaction to their time in the shelter, which is why we're real careful not to draw conclusions or slap labels on dogs unfairly. Even with the adopter, same thing. We're totally transparent. Don't get me wrong. It's all about being transparent. And we'll tell them exactly what we observed, but we fall short of saying he's difficult or he's bad or he's aggressive or he's this or he's that. You know, it's what did we observe?
Right.
Oh, we observed that he gets along well with some dogs and some other dogs he's not crazy about. That's an observation. Versus he's very picky about dogs. Or maybe he needs to be the only dog. So I think we have to be careful we're not leaping to conclusions. And we're very careful also to say, this is what we've observed in the shelter environment. You may experience something different in the home. And if you do, and you have questions and you need our help, please call us.
Well, it's almost time, but I do want to ask one question because it was in the question box and I think it's valid. So we got to make it short, and I don't know who to direct it to. So someone raise their hand. One of the shelters says that their rescue partners ask for those behavior evaluations. So what do you do when you have a rescue partner asking for them, Jackie?
You know what, and sometimes I think we just get language confusion. And I'm sure that the Taysia Blue team asks the shelter partners that they work with for behavior, and then maybe they use behavior evaluations. I can speak for us, certainly, that, you know, we're not looking for a standardized behavior evaluation. We're just looking for observations, just what Denise was talking about. Have you observed guarding behavior? That would be good to know. And I think that's what rescue partners want to know.
Perfect.